Welcome back to the second edition of the world's largest FinTech Fest, GFF, organized by FinTech Convergence Council of Internet and Mobile Association of India and National Payments Corporation of India. The fest is presented by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, Reserve Bank of India, and supported by Niti Aayog, Startup India, and Investment India. We would like to welcome you all for a panel discussion on sustainability, a case for supply chain resilience, powered by HSBC India. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished set of panelists. As the moderator, we have Mr. Sanjay Sadarangani, Global Head of Sustainability at GTRF, followed by our panelists, Mr. Vivek Ramachandran, CEO at Serai, Mr. Monish Ahuja, MD and promoter of Pressbill, and Mr. Sanjay Sancheti, Country Manager and Executive Director, Olam Agro India Limited. Welcome everyone. Over to you, Mr. Sadarangani.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the GFF 2021 Festival and this panel discussion on sustainability, building a case for supply chain resilience. Extreme weather events in North America, Europe, and elsewhere in the recent past have brought home the realities of climate change and the impact on supply chains. The Suez Canal incident, which was estimated to have cost global trade about $9 billion for the 6 days the ship blocked the canal, has also highlighted the need to build a resilience into supply chains. While my colleague provided a brief introduction, allow me to provide some more details on a panel of experts who we've invited to talk through on the session this afternoon. Sanjay Sancheti is the country manager of Olam Agro. Sanjay is a chartered accountant and company secretary with over 3 decades of corporate experience, having worked with global and Indian corporations such as Unilever, ITC Conagra, the Tata and Aisha groups. Sanjay is also co-chairman of the Agriculture Committee of FICCI, besides being on the Agriculture Committee of the CII. Beyond his professional life, he enjoys horseback riding, tennis, motorbiking, and travel. Our second panelist is retired Colonel Monish Ahuja, Chairman and MD of Punjab Renewable Energy and Chairman Confederation of the Biomass Energy Industry of India. Colonel Ahuja is an engineer and alumnus of the NDA Khadakwasla. Besides, he also holds an MTech in nuclear technology from the Bhabha Atomic Research and a BTech in mechanical engineering from JNU. Both Colonel Ahuja and Punjab Renewables have received numerous accolades, including the 50 most impactful green leaders, a global listing by the World Sustainability in 2017, and the UNDP SDG Award for Sustainable Business Enterprise in 2020. Our final panelist is Vivek Ramachandran, the Chief Executive Officer of Serai, a digital B2B platform by HSBC that aims to shape the future of trade by simplifying global trade and helping companies find and trade with new partners. Before Serai, Vivek held several leadership roles at HSBC, including Global Head of Growth and Innovation at the Commercial Bank and Global Head of Product for HSBC's Global Trade and Receivables Finance business. Prior to HSBC, Vivek was co-founder of and CEO of VTA, a boutique advisory firm advising banks in Europe and Asia. He also previously held senior management positions at Barclays and Lloyds Bank. Vivek has a PhD in economics from Carnegie Mellon in the United States. Moving on to our questions, let's start with Sanjay. From the lens of sustainability, what are the goals and what have you been witnessing at Olam across your buyer-supplier continuum?
Thank you, Sanjay. Let me just first lay out the kind of business model and activities which Olam is engaged in. We are basically a farm-to-fork company, and we are present wherever large crops are grown and wherever the markets for those crops are. So in short, we connect farms to markets all over the world. We are present in about 65, 70 countries. Given this kind of a spread, given these kind of value chain activities, the environmental impact which our business model has and of our partners in the business have is substantial. If you look at farming today, farming generates almost more than 40% of the GHG emissions which happen on the planet. Water use is about 70% of total water consumption, which happens all over the globe. There are widespread inequalities in the farming system. There is huge waste which happens at multiple stages in the food and agri value chain. Given this kind of an environment and backdrop, and being a very sustainability oriented company, where we say that reimagining agriculture and making it thrive at all levels is our core purpose. We have woven sustainability into each and every part of our business activity. The framework which we use is basically the 17 SDGs which the United Nations have come out with. And on the other side, we look at its stakeholder priorities. So stakeholders could be our investors, it could be our lenders, it could be our customers who drive a lot of sustainability related requirements in our business model. Given this two-pronged approach, we look at sustainability at all levels. First and foremost, it is the impact which we have on farms. And farms, it is basically water use efficiency. It is about input usage there. It is about emissions which happen there. So for various crops, be it coffee, be it rice, be it edible nuts, be it spices, we collaborate with farmers and ensure that sustainability and traceability is woven into the farming systems. Our procurement systems are completely driven to partner with the farmers, train them in farming practices which are in line with some of these requirements, be it for input usage, be it for water use efficiency, be it for avoiding wastage at the farm end, be it for using seeds and inputs which are climate resilient. Similarly, if you look at the supply chains are all digitally connected, and that's something which is very, very important for us from a sustainability, business continuity, and supply chain resilience point of view. So, given this pandemic, our business actually prospered, and we have seen unprecedented growth in volumes and business as far as various product lines are concerned. And the reason for that is the superior connect that we have between our businesses and our partners, typically at the farming end. And that's where we have used digital technology very effectively through some very customized applications which the company has developed to connect farmers to our businesses, to connect some of our service providers to our business, and ensure that despite the pandemic related restrictions and the lockdowns, our business continued largely unaffected. So, Sanjay, it is basically about each and every decision which we take in the business, be it for deployment of capital, selection of projects, selection of business partners, or selection of service providers, or the kind of business which we do with our customers, that sustainability is completely woven in there.
Thank you, Sanjay, and I'm sure we'll pick up on some of those aspects, particularly around the digital point, which I'm sure our audience will be very keen to hear on. Moving on to Monesh. So, Monesh, from your sector's perspective, what are the opportunities and challenges you have encountered in pioneering the biomass, bioenergy sector in India?
Thanks, Sanjay, and a very warm good morning, good afternoon to all the panelists and the participants here. Briefly, in Pressbill, we looked at a problem statement, and I'm an ex-army officer, and 12 years back when I transitioned into the CV Street in the opportunity for the biomass energy sector, the problem statement was, and it continues to be, open field burning of agri residue. And this is something which we wanted to work upon to mitigate and see what can we do with this resource and take it up the value chain in terms of downstream business of energy, because it does have a calorific value and it also has a value where it could get converted to biofuels. So those were early days, a decade ago. But where we stand today, I think we have been resilient enough, one, as a startup to survive business. The second is in terms of the business that we do, we actually don't need to embed sustainability practice into the business, but by per se, the business itself is a tick box to all the SDGs. So we work rural, we work with farmers, we work in their fields with them. We ensure the open field burning of agri residue does not happen, and across types of agri residue, a problem statement of India continues to remain, but it's a global problem as well. About 8-9 years back, I had a UNDP team from Egypt visit me because the rice straw burning in the fields in Egypt were causing the pyramids, which are World Heritage structures, to go black. And they didn't have a solution. But what we were doing in India was a solution they wanted to imbibe there. So we were able to continue to utilize this agri residue. And today we have grown in scale and size to effectively replicate it across different types of agri residues, different geographies, and India being a large country, specifically, if you are able to do it in a particular zone and replicate it in a different geographical area, it's akin to going to any new country and doing it. So that's what we have been able to do effectively. The second part is in terms of, to answer your question, the opportunities. Today, government has played a very proactive role in the creation of demand. And while we have, as per government data, 750 million metric tons of agri residue annualized, which is available, and Prespel data is more aggressive and much more. But even if you look at that, we could knock off 15% of our energy import, which we do in the country, if we utilize this renewable resource only. And the renewable resource without elements of SOx and NOx, because you don't have the sulfur oxide and the nitrogen oxides, it's pure carbon. And this carbon is actually CO2, which the plant has taken in its growth phase. And you're actually utilizing the carbon in a 12-month period to extract the energy, and you don't put back carbon into the atmosphere. It's actually a complete holistic carbon neutral cycle that you're able to use energy, not go to kind of remove crude or coal from under the earth, which for centuries has been there, and actually be negative in the entire value chain of energy. So the opportunities are huge, humongous. Government has done well by putting 10% co-firing in all coal plants to be done as a mandate. Has announced very aggressive numbers on ethanol, compressed biogas, electricity. What we do in a B2B segment, where we say we don't need government, but we can supply energy utilizing this biomass to corporates who have their mandates for scope 1, scope 2 carbon reduction. So within their plants, replace LDO, replace furnace oil, replace coal, replace pet coke with biomass in a sustainable manner, and create a decentralized energy linkage from rural to urban. And that's where decentralized forms of 200, 300 kilometer hub and spoke model of energy movement, and you can do all forms of energy, including taking this to drop-in fuels, which one of our shareholders has the technology. Shell has the technology, which they are propagating globally, where you can convert this biomass directly into petrol, diesel, aviation fuel. So the future is going to be replacement of fossil across cooking, transportation, aviation, with usage of biomass. So that's the opportunity. The challenges are humongous because it's a new sector. It's something which one needs to develop. There isn't knowledge available that this can be done. Prespel, even today, in our 11th year of business, is the only company in the corporate structure which is doing it in India. We do not have examples of Prespel even around the world. Maybe another company is kind of doing a similar kind of a role. So the scale and size is to come in this new business. We find the big energy giants of the world who have woken up to this: BP, Total, Shell, all the oil marketing companies in India, large companies like Reliance, SR, Naira, all of them, because of the demand being there now, have kind of seized to this opportunity and look at this challenge to convert into a form of energy. So I think I'll pause here with my opening remarks. Back to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Monesh. And that statistic about 15% of the energy imports potentially coming out from the biomass sector is huge, especially as crude oil prices are trending upwards. But let me move on to supply chains. And Vivek, how do you compare supply chain priorities across markets, and to what extent are sustainability initiatives driving these priorities?
So, hey Sanjay, firstly, thanks for having me on the panel. It's really good to hear Sanjay Sacheti talk about Olam and how they go all the way from farm, because the reality is most companies don't know their supply chains well enough. Most companies understand the suppliers they contract with. They have some visibility into tier 2 as you go upstream, but beyond that, it's anecdotal. So supply chains has understandably been hugely disrupted over the last 18 months. And while the number one focus, no matter where in the world you are, is supply chain resilience to ensure continuity of supply, sustainability and transparency into supply chains is becoming a huge theme, especially in the US and in Europe. Now, the emphasis has been a lot on country of origin to prove that there are no bad practices in your supply chain. And that sounds like a reasonable request, and regulators have been driving it very aggressively in the US. Germany has recently passed a Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, which requires every company with over 3,000 employees to attest to certain credentials in their supply chain. Those sound like reasonable requests, but the average company, and I'm talking about the large multinationals here, don't know who's in their supply chain and definitely can't prove it. So Olam is in a very interesting position. It's really nice to hear Sanjay talk about transparency all the way from the farm. And obviously then you can embed practices, you can embed disciplines, you can do the kind of stuff that Monish and team are working on. But the reality is most large companies don't have visibility. So the largest priority we're observing with Western brands, Western retailers, Western multinationals is building transparency. Data collection, ability to get information, understand who is in my supply chain is proving to be cumbersome and in some cases almost impossible to do. So that is a big theme that is consistently spreading across the board. Obviously, sustainability is a reason why you want to do it, but if you can't measure it, there's no way you can manage it. And that's something we're observing as an increasing theme, especially in the West, and a lot of it driven by consumers, but especially by regulators.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I tend to echo that as well, particularly given that the supply chain sits in emerging markets. You've got the buyers sitting in the developed markets, and, how do you track, monitor, measure, and evaluate your suppliers? Absolutely.
And you incentivize. That's the other challenge, because let's be honest, there are lots of bad practices in supply chains. Global supply chains have evolved with a singular objective of cost minimization over decades and decades. And the price you've paid for cost minimization has been lack of transparency. So now to expect these supply chains to unravel, to expose their practices and open up and share information in a very transparent setting is not a realistic ask to happen in a very short period of time, but that unfortunately is the challenge that global companies need to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when you consider a very astounding statistic, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, is that 50% of carbon dioxide emissions globally comes from the upstream and the downstream, i.e. from the vendors and the distributors for various global multinational corporations, right? So it is something that has to be addressed and addressed with urgency. Monish, just coming back to you again, can you talk a little bit about your experience in embedding sustainable practices into the supply chain, into your company's supply chain?
Sure. So Sanjay, we work rural and we take the agri residue from the fields, and we actually create what we call, as we coined the term, as a village level entrepreneur. So here is a farmer in his house, in his village, who we empower by onboarding and creating an entrepreneurship model where we provide to the farmer post-harvest farming equipment, which traditionally a farmer does not own because they don't have any value use of a product which is post-harvest, what is available in the fields. And this is free of cost to the farmer while we price it in our Excel sheet business model. and they then work in their own fields, their neighbors, their villages, and they're able to bring out this farm agri residue to warehousing, collection center, depot, which we create. Now, the practices where we imbibe in this village level entrepreneur is practices of sustainability, practices of meeting the labor laws, practicing of doing things the right way as it would be done. 8-hour shift, gender equality, everybody getting a chance to work in their own fields, and come back time and again, daily basis, in that harvest period of 30 to 45 days, because at the end of the day, once they deliver now a commodity product which was never a commodity to this warehousing or collection center, through the financial inclusion banking system, they get a SMS the next day that for quantity delivered and for quality delivered, they have received money paid into their bank accounts. So what we are able to do is track and maintain data record of each and every village level entrepreneur of what he or she has earned on a daily basis, has earned on a weekly basis, a cycle, and the year round. Once we are in warehousing, now we start creating practices for this commodity to reach its energy value end. It could be biofuels, it could be heating cooling solutions, it could be densification into briquettes and pellets, which we do. And by doing this, so we establish rural plants or rural industries and automated plants in the fields, and that's where we densify this biomass. And by doing this, we are now able to transport this, let's say, to about 300 kilometers as a radius, and still compete with the fossil fuel price on replacement. Now, these practices, we also map the negative carbon in the entire process. So once we are working in the fields, or the VLE is working in the fields, there is negative carbon because we are using diesel for the tractors which are running. When we are densifying it, we assume that the electricity we are using is coal-fired and coal-based. Hence, it's negative carbon which we are using. Once we transport it, let's say, to a 300 kilometer, again, we are burning diesel, which is negative carbon we are using. But when you compare it with the CO2 that this plant in its growth phase has consumed, let's say in a 4-month, 5-month cropping cycle, and replacing the fossil fuel which we replace, we are carbon neutral and carbon negative. And this was learning for me. I was not aware of this. L'Oreal came up to me from Paris, and they said, we want to replace natural gas within our plant in Pune, and we want to replace with something which is carbon neutral. And I was kind of appalled. I said, natural gas is supposed to be the cleanest of all the fuels. What is it going to happen? And I said, let me come back with some numbers to you. So we did this work. And since we were the interested party, they said, no, we would outsource it. And there was a 6-month study which L'Oreal Paris headquarters did. And then those numbers came up, which was a learning for me as well. So for every 1,300 tons of biomass that we use, replacing natural gas, we mitigate 1,282 metric tons of CO2 per annum. And this is with natural gas. So now we use this data with coal, with LDO, with furnace oil, with petcoke, and the numbers that we are able to reduce in terms of the CO2 or the negative CO2 is humongous in the business that we do. And this went back to the COP26 because DFID is invested. The UK High Commissioner to India called me and he had a chat with me. And now these numbers of not electricity but other forms of energy are getting published by India. So government has now realized that we are doing something right, but it's not getting acknowledged globally. It's not getting acknowledged even within India because we continue to do this. And this is where the push for the 10% co-firing across all coal plants, which has come as a regulation, 10% mixing of compressed biogas in the CNG plants, even in the pipe networks, which has come as regulation. And then once you start doing this, I think it becomes a habit. So all the 400 employees across Presspill, sustainability has become a way of life. It's become a habit. Doing things the right way, as it should be done, the textbook manner, has become a habit. It was difficult because when we started off, we didn't do any of this. So we had to first make a change for the 200 plus employees that we had. And then the next lot of 200, for them, there was no change required because this is the way the company runs. So now when we keep moving ahead, incrementally, each day, we tend to improve. And I think we are catching up. So our investors do audit, Shell does an audit, Mitsui does an audit. And every audit, I think we learn that we have moved the needle a bit on the right-hand side and are getting better each day. So I think it's become a way of life for us to start doing things more consciously. And it resonates. The 400 employees, the 10,000 plus VLEs, the farmers and families connected with them, each of them starts putting these practices in place. Thanks, Sanjay.
Fascinating, Monish. Fascinating. Thank you very much for that. Sanjay, coming back to you, at Olam, what is the approach the company has taken to cascade its sustainability agenda to your suppliers? Can you share some of your successes?
Yeah. So, Sanjay, our suppliers are the end suppliers for us are the farmers because we are an agro processing supply chain company. So it makes sense to directly go to the farmers and link farmers to our factories and supply chain. And that's where we intervene and try and make them as efficient and as sustainability oriented as possible. So just to give you an example, let's say for our sugar farming operations, sugarcane farmers, we intervene directly at the farm level. So we have got a fairly strong extension team which works with the farmers, and we ran this climate smart agriculture project with the sugarcane farmers for both our mills in India. And just to give you some of the statistics, basically, which were very water use efficiency oriented, we helped them save about 11 billion liters of water through a mix of various initiatives. The initiatives were either through propagation of drip irrigation there, or changing the way they irrigate their farms, not necessarily through drip irrigation only. So this has led to a substantial increase in their productivity, to their ability to grow cane in a relatively water scarce location has been significantly enhanced. So this has led to one, increase in productivity, lower water usage there in the farming operations, and also quite climate resilient has been the agriculture there, because there have been times when due to drought they have gone out of sugarcane farming, which is the most profitable crop for them. But due to these practices, farmers have been regularly on with sugarcane farming, and that has enhanced their livelihood considerably. If you also look at some of our other operations, so be it with coffee farmers or be it with rice farmers, all these interventions are productivity enhancing. Again, in terms of input usage, where we have cut down considerably the use of chemicals and pesticides there, to not only make it compliant with EU and US regulations, this also helps them get a premium for their produce. So that is the cornerstone of those programs. And on top of it, we also help them, reduce water use efficiency significantly there. So these are some of the examples which I can give where we have helped our supply chain partners enhance their sustainability footprint and livelihood as well.
Thank you, Sanjay, and apologies for interrupting, but and I think it's fascinating to hear also that consumers are willing to stump up and pay a bit more for sustainably grown cocoa or rice or sugarcane or whatever it is. I think that's an increasing trend that we will see as the what we call the Gen Z or the millennials become much more conscious of the environment. Absolutely. Back to you, Vivek. Sarai focuses currently on addressing supply chain challenges in the apparel sector. Now, based on your experience, could you share some insights on the steps the industry is taking on sustainability? And if any of these sort of experiences can be relevant or applicable to other sectors?
Yeah, so we started with one industry, the apparel sector. And today we have almost 15,000 companies on the platform. And that curve in terms of adoption has been exponential. When you have instances where sustainability enhances productivity or improves efficiency, the business case is a lot clearer to convince suppliers. The real challenge is when sustainability comes at a cost, when it's the right thing to do, but it's not necessarily the most efficient way to do things. And that's the reality in a lot of industries. And I think that's where the apparel industry can actually shed some light, because practices that aren't sustainable in many cases are cheaper, in many cases require less investment. So the two big lessons for me that the apparel industry is going through, because it's traditionally been an industry with a pretty low digital quotient without using data. The first is the power of collaboration. So Monish made the point, which is all of these efforts that we're doing, it's not being acknowledged. You have to incentivize suppliers to do the right thing by giving them more business, because it's not always in their interest to do the right thing. So either giving them more business, and I'm sure Sanjay Satrangani, you will touch upon how financial institutions like HSBC are playing a part to ensure the cheaper financing, easier access to financing, quicker financing. You need an ecosystem of partners who are willing to make sustainability the right easy thing to do. Because the reality is, the largest polluter in terms of water is the apparel industry. Purifying the water treatment, these are expensive options, and it does cost the suppliers a lot of money. So recognizing it, collaborating, acknowledging it, giving them more business is the first one. The second is how the information gets shared more widely. So how you and I connect, how we maintain our personal networks has fundamentally changed. Business to business has not changed. So how do Olam suppliers get the benefit beyond dealing with Olam? Now, in the case if they're dealing only with Olam, they're getting the benefit through Olam directly. But if you have large suppliers who are dealing with many downstream buyers, how do they get the benefit? How does the data get shared? And using platform-based solutions, Sarai or otherwise, is a big lesson from the apparel industry. And so doing the right thing is not always the best economic decision in the short term. Some customers are willing to pay for it, but let's be clear, not all customers are willing to pay for it. It's easier to talk about doing the right thing as a customer and caring about where your clothes are made than to actually stump up dollars for it. So at least in the next years, if not the next decade, business is going to have to find a way to do the right thing and make that commercially a sound decision. Banks like HSBC have a big part to play to help with financing, but supplier collaboration is, for us, the single largest lesson from the apparel industry that more complex supply chains can pick up and learn from.
Yeah, absolutely, Vivek, and you're spot on that assessment. Just to elaborate on this, on what we're seeing within the banking sector, is the number of conversations we're having with our clients in pretty much all the jurisdictions we operate on building in sustainability, or helping them build in sustainability practices into their supply chains. What roles can banks like HSBC play? Let me put it this way, it's up by a factor of 4 to 5 compared to where we were last year. It's driven by a number of factors. Of course, climate change, but equally, it's not just about the E, it's about the S, and you touched upon the law that Germany passed, I think in June of this year, about companies understanding the human rights issues in not just their own operations, but equally in their supply chains. And how do companies that are sitting thousands of miles away evaluate, assess, and incentivize their suppliers, which is where a sustainable supply chain financing program, which is what HSBC has been executing with various clients across the world, can come in. Right, the company sets KPIs and what we call targets for its suppliers. They evaluate the suppliers against those targets, And based on the performance of the suppliers, they put in tiered pricing. So the supplier that's ranked, let's say, performs the best against those targets, gets the lowest pricing on its sustainable supply chain program with HSBC. The one that's not ranked as well will pay a bit of a premium. And the whole objective is really to incentivize that, let's say, not as well performing supplier to move upwards in its sustainability practices with the support of the client, of course, and get cheaper financing on its receivable discounting that HSBC offers. So I think the sustainable supply chain program is a fundamental offering that banks can provide their clients with to help improve the sustainability in their supply chain, which, as I mentioned previously, contributes to a significant portion of the carbon dioxide emissions globally, particularly because it impacts the emerging markets, right? And that's where, where banks like HSBC with a footprint both in the developed world and the emerging markets can play a big role, and where we are. But let me get back to our clients again. And Sanjay, we all know that the pandemic has caused very significant supply chain disruptions. From an agri-industry perspective, to what extent do you believe sustainability measures may impact supply chain resilience going forward? And are there any key learnings that you'd like to share with our audience?
So sustainability in our sector means stronger farmers. If farmers are strong, supply chains are resilient. Obviously, there are other service providers who help get the farm produce onto the factories or onto the table, consumer's table. But it is all about stronger farmers. And I must say that even before the pandemic, all these steps were being taken to make the farming system stronger. That's the strongest pillar of our sustainability strategy. So how do you enhance access to finance? Just to your point, how do we work with our bankers to ensure that farmers get finance and get finance at the right terms? How do they get access to the right quality inputs? And those inputs have to be climate resilient as well. How do they get full access to the right kind of farming practices? How do they get trained and developed in not only managing the farms, but also farming as a business? So we work with various FPOs, and we are into enhancing the capabilities of these FPOs, because we feel that for farming systems to be strong, farmers also have to collectivize in some forms. May not be for cultivation, but for all the activities around cultivation. So which could be in terms of accessing inputs, accessing finance, selling their produce. So what we do there is that we really collectivize farmers through this FPO mechanism, and there is a industry initiative also which we are part of. This industry initiative is run by CII, where we are forming almost 50 FPOs to start with. And these FPOs, we are doing absolute 360-degree capability development there, and helping them access various government schemes and benefits which the government is coming out with, so that they become stronger and they are in a position to deliver in adequate quantity and quality what we require for some very discerning customers, be it in India, which is a small section right now, or in Europe, or in certain parts of Asia Pacific, and very importantly US as well. So it is all about enhancing farmer capabilities, either by providing them various inputs or providing them market access, or helping them collectivize also, as I mentioned. So this is something which we feel is the most important thing as far as supply chain resilience is concerned. The other piece which I mentioned earlier was how do we use digital technology to connect with all these, and that during pandemic has been the biggest lesson for us, that if you have to overcome these kind of very challenging situations, use of technology and a digitally connected and enabled supply chain is something which is very, very powerful, very resilient, and actually it's a clear differentiating factor in the market. It helps you actually differentiate against a whole lot of competition. So we have decided to double down on that part, And we have various, technology suites which are available now, which have been all in-house developed. So it is basically to monitor farms, which is Olam Farmer Information Systems. So if you've got a group of, let's say, 1,000 farmers with whom we deal, how do we monitor each and every farm, and how do those farmers get connected with our systems? So to monitor what they have bought, how they are rolling out the package of practices on the farm, and also in terms of movement of finished products, quality as well as quantity, both are monitored through this digital tool. Similarly, we also have technology available for direct procurement of farm produce from farmers. So this has helped us during pandemic immensely, because regardless of the physical proximity, lack of physical proximity during this time, we were able to transact with the farmers without any breakdowns, and that actually cemented our relationship much more with them. And at the same time, it didn't give them any kind of market related shock, because we were in a position to offtake regardless of the market conditions. So these are,
Thanks.
I would say, are supply chain resilience related issues which we are very conscious of.
Apologies for that again, interrupted you, but thanks for that, Sanjay. And I think satellite technology must no doubt be playing a very useful role in helping you support your farmers and to monitor their performance, because we've seen that being replicated across other clients in other parts of the world as well. But technology has certainly evolved quite significantly. Monish, would you like to share some of your experiences from your industry's perspective?
Sure, thanks, Sanjay. So, as I mentioned earlier, we work in a very decentralized format. So we're very thinly spread out, but it also supports each of these hub and spoke model spokes to actually function as individual centers, individual cost centers, individual profit centers. And since we are regional, localized, more rural, the pandemic actually showed us that each of them function seamlessly. The control mechanisms that the hierarchy would actually need to have, we kind of moved it on easy enabled tech, so that the reports and returns, numbers, the activities could flow. But other than that, actually the pandemic did not hit business for us. We doubled on our top line in the last 12 months. We have doubled on the hiring in the last 12 months. Most of it has been, as I said, rural urban connect. But what we also learned was multiple practices of sustainability, HSE, PP, HP that we need to actually better and put in practice. Not only for our employees, but also for the connected supply chain management of VLEs, channel partners, because you need to extend that ownership of our own to your suppliers as well. And that's where the chain should not break. What's also important is, in terms of how we saw the COVID-19 affecting, the isolation, the repair and maintenance, the care for let's say a group of people who got affected, to get the best medical care for them to bounce back. And once we controlled all of this, or we played a major role in all of this, it's something like you have cemented your supply chain management with these practices for good. And this is across geographies what we saw. What we also realized was that business can happen actually without control. And the strata of hierarchy is capable of performing independently. And these are practices which we learned. Now we are putting them as SOPs in our company across stream. So we have gone down to the level of actually making our VLE as a cost and profit center. And we've started mapping that and putting that on digital platforms. What we've also been able to do uniquely in this space is to get the banking network involved in something which we learned from the larger boys like Olam, is for the financing of the farm sector or for your channel partners or for your supply chain partners, where we got farmers involved. And we went to multiple banks, and I think I must compliment the private sector banks to be more faster in kind of putting this rollout available on a pan-India basis. So we as a company actually do the KYC for farmers for banks, because we are connected with them on a daily basis. The banks tick it off to say, yes, this is good. We are good with the KYC which has been delivered. So there's no cost to the bank. Once that's done, we have linked this farmer or VLE now to the banking system for a direct benefit transfer to happen for the commodity which has been delivered to a press mill. So every day when the farmer is able to deliver to us, and he delivers more because he gets paid more the very next day, the banking system releases money directly to the farmer. And thereby, now Pressmill as a company has got a farm financing model available, where in a cycle of 90, 180, 270 days, we are able to repay back the bank. And we have used existing platforms. We haven't done much on the digital side, but use the existing banking platforms to be able to do this. Simple Excel sheet based deliverance, uploading right at the farm level, and create now a database which is humongous. So it's all about data, right? Ola has a data, Zomato has a data, and it's all data numbers. We don't monetize data in the business we do, but hopefully one day, I hope the bankers are listening, we would want to do that. But we have actual data of farmers, right? We have actual data of land holding, actual data of vehicle, actual data of their spend power. And currently, the spend power of what we see in these astronomical valuations of businesses are all urban. But the people in India are all rural, right? Where are we pushing the envelope on the rural spend? And what we are actually doing in Pressmill is putting this additional capital in the farm, in the farmer's hand, in the village level entrepreneur's hand. And now, where we are moving ahead is now allowing or enabling them on a platform to get the buying power going. So we will be able to now support these farmers for better practices of organic manure, for better practices of implements they need, of the Ola Uber model of the farming equipment that they need, and they could do that from Pressmill platforms. So I think that's where we are moving towards. From being a biomass supply chain management company, we have transitioned into an energy utility service provider, and we are moving into a tech and a digital play where we are bringing finance to the farmer, where we are bringing buying power to the farmer. And I think that's where in the next couple of years, I see Pressmill transitioning. So the core continues to remain the 750 million metric tons, which is available. And we need to grow that as a base. Thanks, Sanjay.
Got it, Manish. Very, very impressive. Vivek, we've got an interesting question from the audience for you. It's a fantastic sustainable initiative by HSBC, and thank you for that. In fashion industry, I see undyed and unbleached clothing are more sustainable, or the most sustainable. Yes. And this has a low impact to nature. What, according to you, will be the future of this sector, i.e., unbleached and undyed? What are your views?
I mean, if I wish I had a crystal ball, right? But the reality right now is customers all over the world don't have the information to back up the second half of the statement, which is this is the most sustainable. So Monish made the point, which is it's all about data. And Sanjay made a statement which I really like, which is digitally connected supply chains will be a competitive differentiator. So the reality of what is more sustainable is not transparent. The data, unfortunately, is scattered all over the ecosystem. It sits on individual Excel files, it sits in proprietary databases. Till that information is shared more transparently, we're not going to be able to reshape behaviors about either buying more sustainable product, encouraging more sustainable suppliers, financing more sustainable loans. That's not going to happen. And so I think this is where technology can play a really important factor. And my plea to companies when they think about this is don't solve it yourself. Right? So there's only one person responsible for keeping my LinkedIn profile up to date, and that's me. you have to find a way to let companies share information on their terms in a decentralized ledger. So how you communicate with your friends is likely through Facebook or some other social media channel. How you communicate with your professional network is likely through LinkedIn. How companies share their sustainability credentials, unfortunately today, is Excel files. It is emails, it's PDFs, it's centralized databases that large companies are building. That information is not shared freely. That information is really difficult to get a hold of. So whether bleached t-shirts or tie-dye t-shirts are actually the demand is going to go up, depends on how easily you can convince consumers and regulators that this is actually a better product. Because your word is no more compelling than mine unless you have the facts and the data to back it up. And that's the core thesis behind why Sarai has been set up, is to make information more freely accessible, is to share the information in a much more transparent setting. And hopefully in the next few years, we can do that not just in the apparel sector, but across multiple other industries.
Thank you very much for that. I guess we are up on time. Unfortunately, we can't answer the final question from Shiv. Shiv, apologies for that, but maybe we can take it offline. But look, thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Monesh. Thank you, Vivek, for a very fascinating session. Lots of takeaways for us as a financial institution, no doubt for our audience. Thank you once again for your time this morning, this afternoon.
Thank you so much. This discussion was very insightful, full of key learnings on sustainable practices. Thank you, Mr. Sadrangani from HSBC India, for moderating the discussion. I would like to thank all of you, dear panelists, for taking time out to join us today. We hope you enjoyed being a part of this session. We would like to thank our platinum partners, Visa, Amazon Internet Services, and PhonePe, Diamond Partner Cred, Country Partner Australian Government, and Track Partners HSBC India and Refinitiv India. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us at Global FinTech Fest. We'll be back shortly with our next session. Please stay tuned.
Thank you.